Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming. And I want to inform you that the sessions are recorded on video for future study purpose use. Turn off your camera if you do not like your image being used for video records, and ask to speak off the record at any time when you do not want your say to be part of the videotape. In this way, your part will be cut out of the video during editing. Thank you very much, dear brother Jeff, for your willingness to serve and to share with us this beautiful, beautiful session. God bless you. Welcome. The session is yours.
Just hearing Jeannie fills me with such delight. And it's true with all of you, but the moment it's Jeannie. And in this delight, I hardly know where to go because I'm already beginning to worship the Father. So let's just join in that momentum and modify the idea as is appropriate for you. We worship God, we pray to and commune with the eternal Son or the Creator Son, and we work out the practical details of daily life and our earthly sojourn with the agencies of the infinite Spirit that operate throughout our universe and on our world. So in whatever magnitude you find fit to embrace, let's just go in and have a lovely couple of minutes together before we begin our work on this topic of teaching and receptivity. Thank you, one and all. I am deeply grateful for the opportunity. Hello, Jaime. Deeply grateful for the opportunity to be with you today on one of my favorite topics, one of my favorite activities. And I'm going to jump right in because there's a lot to talk about, and it could be that more people will be joining us. Otherwise, we may have ample time to discuss many things. But once again, what I will do is go through my document with you, not reading everything by any means, because it's way too long to read the whole thing. It would be tedious, it would be oppressive, it would be terrible teaching to just do that. But I want to start with the thought that I sent out to you and put in the opening paragraphs, that teaching is a revelation of truth as we see in the eternal Son. The eternal Son reveals himself in bestowals to each of the Havona circuits, each of these 7 circuits, from the 7th to the 1st. So whatever that is, it's called transcendental, something that's beyond our understanding. But it's a little bit like the Creator Son's bestowal, bestowing a life above all. And we can't bestow in the same sense by any means, but we can bestow our life in the way that a human being can do with other human beings. The other dimension of teaching that I'm going to pay attention to is the kind of education of the intellect. Teaching is loving people with your mind, loving people for the encouragement of the growth of their minds. Of course, it's more than only that, but that was a phrase, loving people with your mind, was a phrase that came to me early on in the teaching that I did. And Donna's teaching is broader than that, but I'll give you the quote and let her let her expand on that, as she may have occasion to do later on. Having mentioned the eternal Son and the infinite Spirit, I also want to remember the great emphasis that I gave in the previous session on leadership. And every teacher must, in some measure, be a leader as well. And the first principle is fatherly love. And I had the pleasure of speaking with a Finnish poet named Sini, and I'm going to get the name wrong if I don't look it, Lilja, a Finnish teacher and artist. And I asked her what advice she would give to someone who wants to be good at teaching. This is one of my favorite get-to-know questions when we can turn to the other person's career. What are the qualities that it takes to be good at something that you do? Cindy's been a teacher for a long, long time. The first thing she said to me, I will never forget. I hope. She replied, love. Love everyone equally. All your students must feel that you are interested in them. Children and adults know intuitively if you have favorites. Now that quality of love, which bestows itself equally on each person, that is the love that comes from our Father, who loves each of us equally. As I dwell now in this little discourse on the deities, I want to bring forward one of the principles that I listed in my document that's online, which now I want to bring right to the head of the class. And that is to trust in the Father and trust in Jesus, Spirit of truth. because that trust takes away anxiety. When I had just read the Urantia book for the first time, I said to myself, well, the main thing in a human life is to say yes to God, truly yes to God. And all the rest is gravy, all the rest. I mean, the main thing is to continue in the paradise adventure. And everything else is secondary. And that became my supreme goal. And there's a long story there, but in the course of wanting to facilitate the possibility that someone could make an affirmative choice to say yes to God, or an upgrade on an old choice or existing choice, that became my supreme goal in living, even though I complicated it and with the pursuit of my academic career and my career as a philosopher in certain ways. And in the process of that, I became at times so anxious, so compulsive about evangelism, that I spoiled the very service that I had devoted my life to give. And just in this past week, I've come to realize that in a beautifully, divinely given way. And the Father's love has enabled me to recover that principle. When I ran into it as I was preparing for this session, oh, there it is, of course. That's it. And when I trust, whenever that trust is spontaneous, things go well. And whenever I become anxious about the other person's salvation, then it doesn't happen. Now, we're going to go down. Let's see. I think I'll bring up the document now. Bring up the document. Let's see. Now, I'm going to have a little moment here. Try this share screen. And here's the document that I want to give you. And now I share it actually for you. I minimize everything else, and I have this document. All right. There are groups of principles in this document, and the first group is get to know the people with whom you are speaking. Get to know people well. I could go on forever, and I have on that. Many of you have, some of you have studied that with me in considerable depth. That's like, it's almost everything in teaching. And now I will mention this next principle. Attune your teaching to others' capacity of receptivity. Select the right level and do not overteach. I don't see at the moment let me put this again. At the moment, it doesn't seem to me that I need to go into this. It's a terribly, terribly important principle. Many, many students of the Urantia book disregard it. Though once you get the feel for it, it's massively evident. The adolescent Jesus was learning to be expert in the divine art of revealing his paradise Father to all ages and stages of mortal creatures. So that all ages and stages. In other words, he didn't hand everyone a Urantia book. He didn't wear a 3 concentric circles sweatshirt everywhere he went. That's all I'm going to say about that. Be on the lookout for human needs. Interpret mercifully for what you observe. I could go into that at length on the concept of mercy, because we have a simplistic concept of mercy, most of us, that is not adequate to the maturity of spiritual living. But this is not my topic right now. Next, wisely choose your approach in teaching. In the light of your understanding of your hearers, be wise in your choice of teaching methods. Now, every time I teach something, I try to refresh my preparation and learn something new. And this last week, I read a book that I'd been carrying around for decades. It had been recommended to me a couple of times, and I never gotten to it. It's called The Art of Teaching Christianity by Wayne R. Rood, R-O-O-D. The book is out of print. There are not many copies available at Amazon. Abe Books has at least one copy. I didn't go into details there, but I found this a very, very powerful book. And I will excerpt from that just the single core idea. I'm going to put it in terms of Urantia Book rather than the language that he used. But think at the end of paper 1, it's the second paragraph on page 31, where we are told that, oh, I want to get it. I can't not give this to you perfectly. Man attains divine union by progressive, reciprocal spiritual communion, by personality intercourse with the personal God, by increasingly attaining the divine nature through wholehearted and intelligent conformity to the divine will. All right, that's what I call the back and forth between ourselves and God. And we know that the spirit gift, the nucleus of our personality, is continually reaching out to us in a way that is super conscious. But when an event is real, when a teaching event and a learning event and an interactive event comes to life, there's something of that dynamic, there's something of that back and forth that becomes effective within the event itself. And there's also the vitality of the one-to-one. The vitality, I was just celebrating Jeannie as I began, because she was the most recent speaker. And before her, there was Susan. And to see her and hear her just warmed my heart as I heard her talking about her study in Spanish and saw her face on the screen. And then there came Gilles, and there was Ed, and all of a sudden I felt, surrounded. I had a few minutes of technological angst as I coped with problems on my way to being able to join you today. But just seeing you was so great and so wonderful. When that interaction is living, there's something wonderful there. And what Wayne Rood said is that, and when we're talking about the Christian story and biblical truth, we're not dealing with content that's flat and dead. We're dealing with content that's living. And all of these interactions between the content and ourselves, between ourselves and each other, between ourselves and God, all of these interactions are alive when the teaching event is really happening. And I remember the line that in the gospel of the kingdom resides the mighty spirit of truth. Well, how's that? When our contact with those teachings is activated by the Holy Spirit, by the Spirit indissolubly one in human discernment, when it's activated by the Spirit, the power is there. And now I just want to expand that. And I want to observe that all reality are configurations of energies that come from paradise. And our identification with cosmic reality enables us to have that interactive back and forth, not on a personal level, but on some level with ourselves and that reality that comes into contact with us as we reach out to experience it. So thank you, Wayne Rood, for enabling me to catch that amplification after the tons and tons of meetings that I've been to and years that I've put in on working to become a better teacher, and all the experience. A thick new layer was added by Wayne Rood this past week. All right, next, whet appetites. Whet appetites. When there are two kinds of wisdom. There's top-down wisdom and there's bottom-up wisdom. And the best of bottom-up wisdom that the revelators could call on, and they called on, 1,000 sources and so on for their work in bringing the best of what human beings had discovered into the Urantia Book as it was relevant to their work and editing it. But this document is top-down wisdom in the sense that it has come as edited by the revelators or given by them, where they wanted to reveal something to us, but there were gaps. They couldn't find anything close enough in the human sources. But a lot of people feel it's enough of wisdom to know what the Urantia Book teaches. Well, it's not, because there's all this bottom-up wisdom. Anything you do, there are people who are expert in that, from whom you can learn. And there's all this bottom-up wisdom. Well, my way of whetting appetites, my way of putting this, has to do with what I call waking up the question. And the idea is, if your teaching is answering a question that the other people aren't asking, you're wasting your time. And you know that attention spans are just in major collapse since the time when I started to teach decades ago, through the period of the internet and digital media and addictions or massive overuse of our phones, our technologies, our favorite social media, whatever those might be. You've got to get people asking your questions. Promote discovery. All the time in here, I'm thinking of Ed Owen. He's one of the gifted and most gifted and effective teachers that I have ever met. And the brevity of what he gives, and the wisdom, and the timing, and the way in which he is utterly trusting in the spirit of truth to do its work, to ripen it, so that if there's another chance or at some later time, he'll be able to add one more gem into the other person's mind. Now, the way that I worked to promote discovery in my classes was the method that I derived as best I could from the Urantia Book, having to do with experiential education. And I would present teachings from the readings that we were dealing with that were the most universally appealing high teachings that I could find. And then I would say, all right, work with these, but feel free to adjust them as you need to so that they will fit what you feel good about putting into your life. So make it more religious or less religious or differently religious or more secular or less secular or differently secular, you know, just however you like. Adapt it until it fits what you feel good putting into practice. And then I gave them 6 weeks to do that. And every class practically had some connection with their projects. And they turned in reports at the end of that time with comments on how their experience related to the questions that were set in the project assignment and how that related to the author or authors or religious traditions or texts or philosophical approaches that we were studying. And that interaction was so powerful as to produce transformation in, I would guess, roughly 2/3 of the people. And I don't know too many teachers who have that kind of record that they can report. About 10% of my people just tried to hunker down and stay under the radar, and the rest of them had positive experiences that weren't so striking as what I called roughly 2/3. And I'll bet Donna is on her way to doing it if she's not already doing it now. Anyway, to be discovered as we go. Observe to study and relate to the other person's experience. And promote discovery has to do with don't just tell people your discoveries. That's one of the big traps in teaching. You tell them your discoveries instead of promoting their discovery. Be artistic. I've got a long discussion of that. I won't go into that. Trust in God and the Spirit of truth. We've already talked about that. In response to critique, don't get defensive. Be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. And here I want to bring in a book that, let's see, where is it? At least a couple of you know. It's called Nonviolent Communication. It's by Marshall B. Rosenberg. And he's got tons of, oh yeah, I talked about it last time. So because I talked about it last time, I won't mention it again. It's just that, you know, fights sometimes break out in the classroom, and hopefully you're not on the business end of one of those, but I'm talking about verbal fights. I've never seen the other break out in the classroom, but there are other stories I could tell but won't here. But anyway, remember that. Now, emphasize truths held in common. We teach best by revelatory living. That's how Jesus taught, by his life. And of course, his life was not a life of silence. He taught by saying and by doing, but every one of his sayings was a doing because it was so grounded in the here and now of the other person and that person's situation and the relationship between him and that other person as that relationship might be able to evolve. So in saying, ask questions and listen. That is a quote from beloved Ed Owen. And we talked about adjust your approach to the people you're dealing with. He and I went forth to talk to street people, homeless people in Akron, and he had experience of that kind of life, and he was my teacher. And he said, Jeff, you could be good at this, but you have to not talk so much, ask more questions, and listen. So I'll just, he was the person with the expertise, the bottom up wisdom. When it overlaps with the top down wisdom, hearing it from Ed was, I couldn't have gotten that by reading the Urantia book, but I got it when I was out there trying to improve and working with Ed. So there we go. Build on the truth in what the other person says. We could go into that in considerable length, and maybe the next time I do any extended session for people, we could do that work. Maybe Jeannie and I can talk about doing that on a later occasion in this series sometime, because I've done that in a workshop. It's very powerful to work with, but it's difficult to set up the exercise, and it's much easier to say, oh, Jesus was so cool with those teachers in Rome. He would select the truth that in what they taught and then proceed so as to embellish and illuminate it as blah, 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 blah. Well, what does embellish mean? As I interpret it, it means add on a cultural or intellectual level to what they're saying, and illuminate means, turn up the rheostat, let that spirit light shine brighter, speak directly to the soul, or at times directly to the spirit. Just, let that become more direct without blinding the other person. Do not try to take something out of the other's heart. I have seen so many students of the Urantia book who felt that they were so much better than the X's or the Y's or the Z's, including other groups of students of the Urantia book. Boy, been there, done that. That we try to take something out of the other's heart. Well, all right, enough said about that. In particular, do not undermine a person's trust in the scripture that motivates their life. If we're getting serious about teaching, if we're getting serious about taking these beautiful truths out beyond the circle of other students of the Urantia book, it is so easy to find ourselves totally wrapped up in talking to each other, preparing for conferences, writing things. We forget that when Jesus sent out the apostles, he wasn't just saying, go to the this ones or go to the that's, although he did emphasize the anxious, the downhearted, those who were stressed out, the people who were in poor health and so on. But the point is that you live in a community and you minister to a community, and the fullness of truth that you crave to minister is not what you can give to most of the people that you meet. So, all right, make the adjustments. Model attitudes of openness and discussion. Now here's another really good exercise. Respond with unconventional words in conventional situations. I have a lot of hats. I have skin cancer, and I don't like, umbrellas aren't very good for the rain. When I was living in Berkeley, California, the strong winds would come and your umbrella would, blow in a way that would destroy it. And so I would just use hats for the skin cancer and for the rain. So I have a bit of a collection of hats, and some of my hats are very nice hats in this way or that. And I get a fair amount of, oh, that's a really nice hat. And my unconventional response is, someone says, that's a nice hat. Or no, they usually say, I like your hat. And I will say, I like your personality. because their personality is shining at that moment. Or someone says, have a good day. If I can feel a glimmer of spirit there, I'll say, have a good eternal life. Or have a beautiful life in truth and goodness. Or if I'm at the toll gate, you know, sometimes I'll say, can you give me directions to heaven? If I feel a glimmer of spirit. So, conventional situations, develop unconventional responses. And then develop the capacity for advanced responses where you're able to challenge someone strongly without losing it, without falling into anger. By doing, minister as you pass by, of course. Move from service discovery to ministry revelation. I think you can understand when the love is really pouring out of you, then that's ministry revelation. And then say 3 kinds of helpful things. This is drawn from Jesus' discourse on Rome. Practical and immediately helpful suggestions, looking toward the correction of their real difficulties. I have never worked on this adequately, but, you know, just doing this makes me want to ask Jeannie for another opportunity in another month or so. Words of present comfort and immediate consolation. I mean, we should really, and it takes time to give yourself examples of this. What does this actually mean? In a concrete case, what would this mean? What can we say? That takes time in ways that we're not going to take time for right now. And then this is the part that we always like to skip if we're in a secular situation. But he would tell, or even if we might feel that we're not in an altogether secular situation, but we're still shy about this. Tell these distressed mortals about the love of God and impart the information by various and sundry methods that they were the children of this loving Father in heaven. Engage in social service as needed. Social service is different from personal ministry. It may be, you know, in a group setting, but most of all, social service ministers to whatever the need is, including material needs, including intellectual needs, including whatever. It's not especially spiritual, although it may be. There are exceptions, and the last one here is smile. And I'm at this point remembering what Errol Strider, the dramatist and marvelous entertainer, speaker, did when he came to the Boulder School when I was the director there in about 87 it was when he came and did something for us. We were studying in part 4, and he had us take an encounter with Jesus. And we imagined ourselves, this might have been the meeting with Fortune in the Hills, page 1437, if you use those page numbers. It might have been that I seem to recall, I'm not sure, but the point is we had to speak as, we had to play the character of Jesus. We didn't have to memorize any lines. You know, we had no time in the immediacy of his presence. But there was a new challenge there. And that new challenge was, you know, it's one thing to read it. You're passive. You're not hearing it. But when you have to speak it, you're expressing, of course, yourself in a certain way, but you're expressing attitudes. You're expressing an interpretation. You're trying to say it as you can imagine Jesus would. And all of a sudden, it's a huge new challenge to do that. And wow, it's fun. And, you know, how really would, and you start to see what marvelous experiences can happen when that is being done. Now, I'm interested in line 4 in this. in this discussion of smile. When Jesus smiled on a man, that mortal experienced increased capacity for solving his manifold problems. Well, lots of people smile, but as a result of those smiles, including our own, does anyone ever experience an enhanced capacity for solving their manifold problems? Well, I think it can happen to some extent with people like you all, and maybe people like me. I suppose maybe I'm one of those at my best, and to some extent, when I'm at my best. But just think about that now, and let the smiles begin to rise in you as I stop sharing and return to your faces before me. Oh, oh my. Well, no, that's what I have. That's what I have for us. And just a moment here. There we go. Here's the full. Oh, I am at the full. Are there only 6 people here, Jeannie? Oh, okay.
Yes.
Only 6. All right, fine. So maybe we'll have time for some of these exercises I thought we wouldn't have time for. But I've got one more thing for you that I didn't mention, but at this point, I want to just step back and let you raise whatever you want to raise.
Nice to see you, Donna.
Ed.
Well, since my name was brought up so lovingly by you, Jeff, I would like to say a couple things about our ministry that we attempted. When I say attempted, because I always feel like unless there was some big follow-ups to it, it wasn't quite successful as I wanted to be. So we'll probably never know until we get on the other side. But one of my weaknesses I felt was when you have these discussions with people, you talk about our Father's love and how a few other little quotes that we have from our Urantia book, then you come to a point where a discussion has to evolve. And one of the things that I was a little bit confused about from the Urantia papers was on page 1683, evening lessons. When Jesus would talk to these people, and he'd talk about situations such as dreams and visions, pride and presumption, forgiveness in relation to repentance, peace and perfection, doubts and unbelief, etc., etc. This would continue his service to this individual or to these individuals. And for me, my biggest weakness was not being able to continue in these conversations to take it to a certain period of time and then maybe have another meeting later on or whatever. And so I was kind of always looking for an ending to my beginning of my sermon to these individuals. And so that was my biggest weaknesses. And the reason I mentioned that is because I'm hoping somebody else would maybe have these situations where he's talking to somebody and it kind of draws into a place where it dies. So anyway, that's my little bit for this morning. Thank you.
First,
Donna.
yes. Okay.
My turn?
Yes, please.
Forgive me, friends, I don't have a lot of vocal power. I have a little bit of a cold. But Ed, I completely get that. It happens in my own career in that I'm a touring performance artist. And so many of the engagements that I have, you see people for 2 hours, maybe 4 hours in all the cities that I go to. And then I have to leave hoping that something has completed. And usually as an instructor, I have the benefit of seeing that investment recycled back very quickly. But with touring engagements, it's always about letting go, letting go, letting go. And so I think I've realized in those situations, the most important thing I can do is to give a, I don't know if you would call it a caveat, but an offering before I even begin, saying if any of this resonates and you would like further resources, I'd be so excited to connect with you. If there are parts that feel antagonistic and create differences of opinion, I would be so excited to have your thoughts shared with me. It helps me grow and it helps me understand the material better. And to, as Jeff mentioned, to welcome critique, to, I call it open heart, thick skin, of being willing to constantly ask for feedback, even in those short settings, of what parts maybe do create antagonism for people or dissonance, cognitive dissonance of some kind. And so I'm able now to try and create a tighter feedback loop to grow. Not, whether or not that person has the mobilization of their will to actually make changes in their life is something that for me is between them and the creator. But if I am one of those persons to at least give a very friendly reminder or to just say, want to get back to that, then I consider that a job well done. And I feel like there's a lot of magic, miracle, and serendipity and coincidence and all kinds of crazy things that happen after that moment of inspiration occurs. And I think good teachers know how to get out of the way, and I think that's what I struggled with as a young teacher, as a professor, is trying to feel like I was responsible for their breakthroughs, and if they had challenges, it was somehow my responsibility. And I had to remember that they have their own journey, and my job is to point the way forward and get out of the way and be there to support them if they fumble, so that they know that I'm always someone that's approachable. And that's what I've endeavored to do, because it can feel emptying if you're constantly putting out information and you're like, I don't know if it's making a difference. I don't know if it's helping anyone. But I can promise that I've at least learned how to trust and get out of the way. And that's a big ego lesson for me, because I was taught by some very charismatic, overbearing cults of personality, who wanted to be worshipped, who wanted the guru vibe. And so that was the modeling that I had for my early teaching career. And I'm very grateful that I've learned to unplug from that, because it becomes a game of emotional manipulation that I never want to contribute to. I've talked quite a bit. I will hush up.
One thing I would love to have conversation with you back and forth, maybe email or something, because that would be quite rewarding for me. So maybe you could put your email on the chat thing, and then we'll get together as we cruise through this universe career. Thank you.
A delight, sir. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you.
Yes.
Jules has raised his hand. hand. Sorry.
Yes, thank you. But first, thank you, Jeff, for your presentation, for outlining those principles. It's very nice to hear someone like you teaching from the heart and experience, and with a message that is different than Urantia Book pushing. Like bringing Urantia Book and, you know, wow, you don't want to read Urantia Book, you are wrong, kind of thing. So I definitely appreciate this message, because well, I feel this is very important. So I'm with you on that one, and thank you for organizing and speaking to us about it. Now, I have a question. The question is about credibility. What I mean by that is that, you know, if you get a chance to you know, listen first, and then at some point people ask you a question and you start, you know, expressing, and as you have, many of you have experienced, when you get in that mode, you know, you become you know, enthusiastic about it. So things come out, and things like, you know, you know, divine is in you and loves you, and you have an eternal career in front of you, and if you choose so, and things like that, right? Whatever you may chance to say that is relevant with the situation and the person you, or the persons you are talking about to. So then it can come about at some point that people say, well, hold on a second, you know, well, how do you know about that? And start challenging that, and people can come from a variety of background. You have the typical Christians; they come with their Bible, and one of your points, Jeff, is about not going into the difference and the challenging, and it could be atheists, which was my original background since my parents were atheists, and there could be people just in pain and suffering and not being able to get through that, and having a hard time, you know, hearing the message of the love of God when they are in so much pain and suffering, and whatever prejudice they may have. So there are many reasons they may challenge some simple messages regarding the gospel. So personally, before I let you answer, I'm going to say, for me, the first thing I don't do is brand the Urantia Book, and I rely on faith. And I say faith is a personal experience, and you've got to have it to try it. And that's what I rely most about. That's because I think that's the most relevant and the most important and the most true as well, and the most personal on one hand and unbiased on the other hand, because many people have that experience. But then I want to push the question is like, well, how do you know that your faith is not the fragment of your imagination, that kind of thing? People, particularly the atheists, could push very hard on that, right? So the heart of my question is, when we get to the point of teaching some of the part of the Gospels, whatever ways, and sometimes some elements of information that we get from the ancient we may come in, and we get challenged back about the credibility. How do you address that?
Thank you very much for your questions, plural, because there were a number of different factors that you put in there. First of all, I always seem to pick up, I don't want to trust it too much, but at the beginning of an interaction, I get some sense of the degree of spiritual openness in the person I'm speaking with. And that sense of their spiritual openness, of course, refines and becomes more clear as the conversation goes on. A lot of the conversations that I have in this way are very, very brief. And I don't imagine that I know this person well after just one of these conversations. But in the back and forth, I get a sense of what I can say with them. Now, the book that I've recently published, titled Living in Truth, Beauty, and Goodness, I can't remember whether I shared a copy with you, Gilles. If not, email me and I will have a copy sent to you. The others of you, one is already on the way to Donna, and the others of you have copies. But what you find there is a language that allows you to come into the realm of divine values of truth and beauty and goodness without using religious language. Now, that book uses religious language, but it also gives complementary languages, so to speak. And it also unfolds paths of thinking, paths of experience, paths of rationale, if you will, that help people to answer these tough questions. A background in philosophy and decades of teaching experience do help in giving you some approaches to answer these questions. Now, if you stay with your initial sense and don't say too much, or put the emphasis on, asking a question, then you'll interrupt your own tendency to say too much. I think it's when you say too much that you run into trouble. And the more you are surrounded by an aggressively secular environment, the more careful you have to be in this regard. Not fearful, but just, it's a way of loving the other person to speak in ways that don't trigger their antagonism to religion in general. It's very easy to be antagonistic to religion in general. So I remember one minister who was a very great teacher, and I said to him, how can I avoid coming on too strong? He said, keep the focus on the other person. Keep asking questions. And I remember a guy that was so great at starting conversations. We met just once in a restaurant. We were having breakfast or something like that, or it might have been some other meal, and he was so good at it. And this guy, and I asked him, how are you so good at getting conversation started? He was just very gifted. And he said, well, suppose I come into this restaurant and I see someone sitting down having a meal. I'll ask them, I'll just kind of pour out the questions. How often you come here? Do you usually have eggs and bacon, or just anything to just start this joyous activity? And when you come with that joy and that attentiveness and that observation, your observations and your knowledge of different kinds of people will enable you to pursue conversations and show interest and achieve identification with aspects of their experience. All right, so I think that's about all I'd say. Is there, who else would like to put something in or follow up on that? Go ahead, Donna.
I learned from one of our students in a production. It was what was the production? It was a production where a young man was in full drag queen attire, in a very progressive stage play. And it was so interesting because as he took his final bow for the production, the audience would be going crazy, and there he is up in, 6-inch heels and leather straps and bustier and all that. And he would do, a gesture up like, I'm here because of him. And he didn't say anything, but it was a nonverbal gesture where he was constantly in his actions, even after doing hedonistic things in this play, said, I'm here because of him. And it was an act that created a tremendous amount of buzz in our department because people considered his action and his faith to be contradictory. And it gave him the opportunity to start many, many conversations as people would approach him, like, you don't feel like you're in conflict with your faith getting up there and pretending to have sex all over the stage and wearing leather and saying crude things. And he'd be, he had great intelligent responses for it, but it all came from him taking an opportunity at an unexpected moment to just do a gesture. Maybe it's a way of saying thank you, or it wasn't even a word, but he created an entire ministry in the department from a gesture.
Uncommon response in a common situation. Undoubtedly, he'd done it before. I'm guessing that he'd done it before, but once you find a good response like that, you realize that it can be used on lots of occasions. Okay, next. Ed.
I wanted to mention one thing about our light we give off when we're interacting between our neighbors or whatever. I found out recently, and Susan and I, on our walks, we've been called in 2 or 3 times just recently by other people that wanted to talk to us. We're walking along and they go out of their way to come over and say hi or something from us, where this few years ago, this doesn't seem to be happening. So maybe it is something out there in the cosmos that's kind of leading us to be ministers to our friends and neighbors. And so we have this kind of cosmic light. I'm not saying we're glowing or anything, but I find it happening more and more often. And so I wanted to bring that up as in case anybody else is having the same experience. When we get these complete strangers kind of move into our area and want to ask questions or talk to us or say hi. Thank you.
I'll give you a story on the other side of the equation. I like to smile at people and look at them at length. I just enjoy the one-to-one, the mutual gaze, it's like hugging someone from a distance. And I was told by beloved Hagiko that in Japan, people don't like that. It's in fact rude to hold your gaze like that and smile at them for any extended period of time. And I learned that was so. And so even the smile is something that needs to be done within the context of culture. Well, I'm going to go to my last planned item for the day, and that was a response to Pio's question last time. And then if we still have more time, we'll just dig into some of these difficult things. I think we'll go to the one from how Jesus ministered in Rome, and we'll just dig into that for the time that we have left. But let's see how what we can get on this particular topic. Pio's a guy that I have known and greatly appreciated for a number of years. He's well, I won't go into that, but among his many hats, he's a businessman. And he asked a really great businessman's question. He said, how do we get young people, or maybe just people who haven't done it before, to volunteer to step up and go to conferences and offer to speak or offer to do a workshop? How can we tell them a method that they can follow in order to do this? And I thought at the time, that was last week, it was a really great question. And it was nagging at me, and I ended up coming back to it repeatedly. And I'm quite interested in the question. I'll share my results and then open it up to what you would like to add, subtract, multiply, or divide. I find the question, excuse me, at least from my capacity, sometimes you can be overdeveloped in one area and not realize it, and then become handicapped for other situation types. That could be my problem here. But I found the request that Pio made to be very insightful, very appropriate, very excellent, and also impossible to answer. Insofar as I would seem to make it my business to give a recipe, a 1, 2, 3, 4. So I struggled with it, and here's what I came up with. And I'll just take these in the sequence that I have written down and jotted some ideas here. For public speaking, a standard college text can be helpful. From a standard college text, you can learn about the quote 4 types of purpose. These things are always very unfortunate in their brutal oversimplification of things. But at the same time, they can be very helpful. I used to teach public speaking a lot, and I would see a lot of speeches fail because the person hadn't clarified their purpose. And the standard purposes are to inform, to entertain, to persuade, to celebrate. That's a list that I saw a few times. But whichever one is your primary, the other dimensions become secondary, and you make sure that those other dimensions are brought in ways that support, not upstage, your primary purpose. Some recommend Toastmasters. I've gotten some good working with them, but I recommend a book by Jessica Summers Driver titled Speak for Yourself. And I can't say enough about that book. Jessica Summers, S-O-M-E-R-S, Driver, as it sounds, Speak for Yourself. That book is back in print, and the price, I believe, is under $12. And it is an utter, utter, utter gem. And beloved Donna, this is one for you. This is one for you as a person in the performing arts. I can't say enough about it. I won't go into it right now. And now, it helps to have read the entire Urantia book, but that's not necessary. Don't feel overwhelmed by the challenges of expertise. It takes a lot of maybe decades of work to become expert in some significant area with the Urantia Book. Don't wait for expertise and mastery before coming forward. It's also very helpful to have a mentor. You can get mentors by looking at lists of conference presenters and asking people, you know, who could help me with this. And workshop leaders. Not that everyone's guidance is equally wise, but the discerning individual can learn something from just about anyone. Next, there are ideas on teaching that you can get from the Urantia Book itself, and I would tuck in the URL for my own document in that regard, which I'm going to be modifying yet again in the light of the work that I did this past week to prepare for this. But I know that David Kulicki, the head of the fellowship, excuse me, I was distracted by that, by how my computer responds to that chat. Here, let me just pick it up. All right, whatever. I've got to learn how to work with chat in these Zoom sessions. I'm not good at that at this point. I know that the Latin American folks are much more familiar with that than I am. Oh yeah, David Kulicki, who's the head of the Fellowship's Education Committee, has done a ton of work bringing out quotes from the Urantia Book pertaining to education. And so I know there are a lot of materials there. I'm sure there are lots of things, lots of places. Now, when you're proposing, next point, when you're proposing something for a conference, cooperate with the theme or themes that are proposed by the conference organizers. Don't just use it as an opportunity to do your own thing. I consider it very, very important to cooperate with your assignment if you're given an assignment. Just do your utmost, not in a slavish way, but in a wholehearted way to complement what they are doing and not just to do your own thing. And also, this is another thing that I've started to do very consciously now and deliberately. I always choose something that has me on my cutting edge, on my frontier, so that I can devote myself in the matter of these conference presentations. I usually have months of preparation time. And during those months of preparation time, I make it my business to embody those teachings, the ones that I am trying to bring to life in my plenary session or workshop or whatever it might be, to become that truth as much as I possibly can. Next, don't be discouraged in case your event attracts few participants. Where there are lots of things going on simultaneously, the people who are lesser known get overlooked. It's very understandable. But what it means is that the first time out, you might not have many people come. Make your peace with that. You can hone your skills. This is a learning process. Over time, you will become known. Just take it as a learning experience. Give everything you can. When I was doing monthly religious services at the Matilda Brown Home for retired ladies in Oakland, there would be a dozen of them at most, and a half dozen very often. And I quickly learned to be very content with however many had showed up. And that was, you know, that's essential. Might be better to begin with a workshop. And major conferences organized by major organizations, and the last example in my mind is the Urantia Book Fellowship's IC17 conference that was organized for Denver. On the workshop form, if you wanted to be a workshop presenter, you had to apply. And you applied by filling out a form. And on the form, there were all kinds of questions of how you would involve group participation, whether you would use multimedia. I mean, there were lots and lots of questions to fill out. And those questions become very good opportunities to think about things, to think about dimensions and questions and challenges and potentials that you had never thought about. So take advantage of something like that. Make sure that your workshop is a workshop, not just a lecture. You are there to promote discovery, not simply to share your own discoveries. Practice with groups beforehand and refine your approach in line with that experience. If you have a group of people, or maybe you can have a version of it that you can use with Christians, or a version of it that you can use with some other religious group, or with people who, in a context that is more or less secular. You know, practice with groups. Pio. We are at the end of my initial presentation and the conversation following that. And so what I've started launching into now is my response to your question at the end of the previous session. What can we say to people who are, whom we want to encourage to come for the first time and make a presentation, or propose a workshop? So I'm going into this now. I'm almost done with what I've written, but I'll share this with you, and you'll hear all the discussion that follows, because I thought your question was one, on the one hand, totally incisive, brilliant, a practical businessman's contribution to people like me who sometimes don't think in that direct and very important way. I just celebrated the question, and I also said it's impossible to answer by giving a recipe, 1, 2, 3, 4. Some people will give recipes, and some recipes are undoubtedly very good. But anyway, I'm not a recipe guy. But then have a lesson plan. Think about roughly how much time you're going to allow for this component and that component of what you want to do. And the point is not to be compulsive about time, but just having a rough schedule in mind will enable you to manage the time much more effectively. Mm-hmm. For myself, I like to begin on time. This habit of always waiting, 5 minutes or 10 minutes until people get here is just establishing a culture of negligence and disrespect and da-da-da-da-da-da. So I do very little of that. And I'm always careful to end on time so that people can get on to the next thing, unless I happen to be the last thing of the day, and then people want to, but still, I like to end and then say we can, so be punctual. Jesus was punctual. Jesus was punctual. We can be punctual too. Mm-hmm. And then Be sure not to overteach in a plenary or any presentation. I can't tell you how many times I've seen someone get up there and they start speaking and they get on a roll and they just keep going because they feel inspired. And people are nice to them because it's loving to be nice and not to interrupt them and say, shut up. And so they end up constraining other people's time, or the lunch hour, or the start of the afternoon sessions. Don't do that. And conferences need to be strong in making sure that we, who like to think that we're at the top of the plateau of human culture, are actually cultured and decent in our use of other people's time. All right, that's what you heard. Now, here's Pio, who can take notes for himself, as I will be taking notes from you too.
Me? You want me to speak?
It's open to anyone.
First of all, I apologize for not being punctual. I usually am. But if you see my lip droop, I had a root canal yesterday. So you still, you see my lip drooping? I had a root canal right here. So I was knocked out with pain pills and now I'm good. So I'm usually not late for church service, meetings, or golf. Never.
Don't worry. That my remark was there on the, you know, it was already there. It had no particular idea of Pio in mind. Not at all.
Of course.
Okay.
But I agree with you 1000%.
Okay.
Number two is my question was brought up just as I was, you know, coming in late. It must have been somebody up there. Good timing for me to listen to this. But the reason why I brought up the question was usually people in leadership like you, Jeff, are a magnet for other people to come to listen. And as all the conferences I always try to attend your workshop, I was wondering whether in this weekend session, which I think is a very good thing, you know, internationally, I was thinking of why, what if like Mo Siegel or Jeff, you know, Jameson's or somebody at the trustee would also participate, because they're in the, you know, they're in the foundation, would have helped. Yeah. So, and then, you know, good old Jatan was always there, and he has been an inspiration for me. And so that's why I brought up the question. So no more talk. I'll just unmute. Thank you.
Sorry, don't want to dominate. Gilles had such a great question when he asked about, you know, encountering resistance in others and negotiating. And I guess I want to testify a little bit, and Jeff, invite you to please offer any thoughts you have on it. I'm a pedagogy professor in my department, and I teach young people about how to facilitate movement for others. And we had a culminating project this week in that 19 young dance students had to facilitate movement for citizens who were dealing with some type of impact to their lives. That impact could be cognitive, developmental, chemical, neurological, all kinds of impact. And 15 minutes before one of our public workshops was set to begin, we had a student that bagged and sent a quick text to everybody saying, sorry, I can't make it. I realize I have too much going on. This was her culminating project, which endangered her grade, which means that she has the potential to flunk the class rather than face her own resistance. And of course, we have policy ways of dealing with it, but I'm also trying to look at an opportunity to still keep it as a learning moment. But it made me realize, we have a saying that, you know, you can lead a horse to water, can't make him drink, can lead a student to knowledge, can't make him think. And it just seems so astounding to me that the student could not find it anywhere within her to take on her own biases and prejudice and fear of being in the room with someone who might have Down syndrome or autism, and was willing to risk flunking the class rather than be in the room. So that resistance that Gilles brought up, that when someone is entrenched in and their heart is closed. Jeff, do you have any moments that you'd like to maybe share about how you've overcome or navigated those moments?
Oh, beloved sister, I can only grieve at the moment for the student, for her spirit guide, for you, for the rest of the class, for the rest of the people who missed the opportunity to meet her. It's very common to say, I want to push you out of your comfort zone. I was to quote that line a lot in my class. Well, you know, in many of my classes, whenever I would be engaging in experiential projects or other things, I would say, I'm not trying to push you out of your comfort zone. I'm trying to expand your comfort zone. And I would make it my business to give them a path. Making myself a note to say something that I don't want to forget here. I would make it my business to give them a path to that experience, so that I wasn't throwing them into the deep end the first time they approached the pool. Gradually. I think that's one thing that I would say. And maybe this does relate. One time, and I tell you, I just, there was a period of about 4 years when I found that my interest in learning about teaching was stronger than my interest in learning more philosophy. I just went to so many sessions and read this and that and tried this and that. And it was so awful in a way to have to teach just by myself and have the colossal burden of leadership resting solely on me, when I craved someone that I could teach with, who could discuss things with me. One of the things that I found, I'm going to say a number of things here. When Aristotle talked about public presentations, what is it that makes a speaker effective? Number one thing is ethos. What is the character of that individual as that expresses itself from the start? What kind of person do we feel this to be? It used to take me 2 or 3 a week, maybe 3 class meetings before the class had really started. It took that long to get the respect, the devotion to task, the beginning of really getting it going, to wake up the question, if you will. After a decade, 15 years, or I don't know how long, maybe I'm making up numbers here, I could do it from the first day. And people could feel the strength. They could feel that I wasn't, well, you know, it's all about whatever you feel like doing. You know, did anybody read anything for today? That's what I said last time, remember? Did anyone read? That's what I said, because I'm so used to it. Among students of the Urantia Book, they come to a workshop, they don't bring their Urantia book, so you have to provide the handout or put it. It's just so much a civilizational slide in reverse that is just accelerating. Oh, it's wretched. But I got to the point that I could have the class with me in a good-hearted spirit, not intimidated. Some people would just be intimidating, and then sort of later on in the course you realize it was all from love. And they loved it, you know, because they were getting disciplined in ways that no one else would do. That's never been my approach, but anyway. But there was one point when I was struggling because my courses have always been demanding, especially at the front end. By the end, people usually would say with these experiential projects that were so unfamiliar and so disorienting the first time the first week that they were presented with this assignment, they would be spinning around in confusion. You know, just they were lost. They didn't know how to. And then I had my ways of dealing with that. But my courses have always been demanding, with one interesting exception. But I looked at the lesson on the family that Jesus gives. It's on page 1604. So it's in paper 143, something like that. The lesson on the family, I think it's the second section. And the first section is the fact of existence. Without a teacher, the class, there's no fact of existence. There's got to be, you know, something happening, or the group can spontaneously, but there's always some leadership functioning. But the next thing after that is security and pleasure. Security and pleasure. A good father, and by extension, a good parent, provides for security and pleasure. Now, in our culture, the idea of the classroom as a safe place is sometimes taken to such extremes that challenging perspectives that disagree or make anyone feel uncomfortable are branded as an unsafe space. Fears and reaction to challenges and anything that feels threatening and antagonism levels are at such a point that, I mean, it's really getting unreal. But when I remembered to provide for security and pleasure, just remembering that made an instant, tremendous difference in my ability with my students. So that's as much as I'll say, coming back to your, excuse the very diffuse response, but I think it somehow weaves together a little bit. Susan Owen. Hey, beautiful. What would you say to Pio saying, how would you advise reaching out to someone and giving them encouragement to step up and apply to speak at some conference or give a workshop somewhere. And I'll throw in one more thing. Do a local one before you try for a, you know.
You took my answer.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, that's a place to start where you're safe, you know, in your study group.
Yeah,
And,
that's right. That's right.
Yeah. So, and that, you know, should be one of the things that study groups are
That's right.
about.
That is so right.
Not just reading a book the week after week, but preparing. And
that's right.
you know, it's such a safe space to do that. And I know in one of our groups, we had separate, we decided we all needed to get better at public speaking. So we started meeting in a separate group, all of us, and because we had one person that sort of did that, and recorded each got up, and, you know, said a little short 10-minute presentation. We got recorded, got feedback from the group, got to watch ourselves afterwards, critique it. What a learning experience, you know. It's a whole different thing to see yourself from the outside, looking at yourself as others do. But we get that now because we have these video conferences and watch ourselves all the time. But, I mean, you say a lot more, but you covered so much good information for this. Pio, was that your question about how to get? Are we answering the right question?
As I recall, my as usual, it was not written down, but my question came out last weekend, saying, how do I get people, you know, to step up? Because I just had an invitation from Amsterdam to look for volunteers to host a seminar. And I picked one individual, and at first she was very enthusiastic. And then she caught herself and said, oh, this is in front of the people. I said, yeah, hello, it's not a plenary. And he goes, oh, Jeffrey Wattles would be much more good at that. So it always goes to poor Jeff. And, you know, of course, you know, Jeff's been a professor for many decades, and he's disciplined in his academic research before presentation, you know, and subject conclusion. So people are just, you know, enamored to Jeff. But Urantia, besides being professional, have a lot of non-professional from all walks of life, just like the Receiving Commission in Chicago. So I was wondering how, including myself, would gather up the courage to pick a subject matter. Of course, in Amsterdam had a big submit your proposal. So I said, well, you asked me for volunteers. So that's what brought up the question to me. How do we get people besides pedagogues and professors, you know, to step up and host workshops, you know, enthusiasm. So that leads to one other question this weekend for Jeff or anybody at the panel is, I myself was in management all my life with companies. So I'm very cut and dry. So I'm a professional administrator or manager. So I manage things. But in regards to it, what did the book say about self-consciousness, or in today's psychological word, you know, inferiority complex, or self-conscious? Was the word self-conscious brought up in the Urantia book as a subject matter or a problematic terminology? Anybody recall that? Because I recall, you know, remembering the word self-conscious. Because people don't step up because they're self-conscious, maybe. Anybody care to answer that?
Yeah, I'd like to speak to that. And I would strongly recommend to you what I earlier mentioned to the group. Oh, wait a minute. It's in the materials that I will be sending you. Jessica Summers Driver, Speak for Yourself, is one of the best books I know of for dealing with that problem. And I think it handles it so well that, you know, and in a nutshell, it's if you are engaged with the truth of what you are bringing to your people, it's not about you, it's about the truth. And if you are abiding in that living truth, you're not worried about what people are thinking about you. And the one other thing that I also tell people who are experiencing performance anxiety, which is extremely common, even in excellent performers, pray for the audience, pray for the people, because that will also take your worry about off yourself. To be self-conscious is the fear. What are they thinking of me? And so you can't destroy that fear, but you can upstage it by bringing in the truth that is yours to work with, and your privilege being part of having a chance to help the deities minister to these individuals that will be interacting with you silently or explicitly in the time that you have together. I want to say one other thing about what Donna spoke about earlier, because when you're teaching someone, you've got them for, you know, my experience was mostly with semesters. You've got, including exam period, 16 weeks. You can really make a difference in somebody's life in 16 weeks. But I take refuge. The hardest thing for me about retirement was that I couldn't facilitate transformation as I had before. Why? Because I couldn't get people into activity. I'd teach in Sunday school, and now I'm realizing more and more exceptions to this. But my experience had been that people like to be entertained intellectually and religiously and maybe spiritually. They like to have some presenter that is attractive on various levels. But, you know, you don't see anything happen as a result of it. And that was the time when I really took refuge in Jesus' teaching and this is paper 178, section 1, discourse on sonship and citizenship, where he says, the persistent preaching of this gospel of the kingdom will someday bring to all nations a new and unbelievable liberation and spiritual enlightenment, something like that. Well, preaching. Now, preaching is, you know, you have your moment and then you're off. You might see the person once in your life. And Jesus is saying, or remember where it is. Is it in, I think it's in one of the papers, maybe it's the paper 48 on the Urantia life. Every act is eternally potent in accord or in proportion to the divinity of its motivation. So your power is going to increase as you grow as a total person and bringing the ethos of a life given to God to your time with that person. I remember a woman who you know, we were talking earlier about uncommon responses to common questions, say, or common situations. How are you? Lots of times It was my habit. Stretches of time, it's not my habit the way it used to be. How are you? My standard answer was joyous and grateful. A person walked up to me one day, ran into her at Kent State University. She said, you know, you made a big difference in, yeah, we were in the, yeah, we ran into each other in the student center. You made a really big difference into me. I waved at you in the parking lot, and we don't know each other very well at all. We know each other a little bit. It's positive, but you know, it's not substantial. Waved each other in the parking lot, you know, like 30 yards away. You know, it's like, hi, how are you? And you said, joyous and grateful. And it hit me like a ton of bricks, because it was at the end of the day, I was feeling so trashed out. I was feeling so, you know, up to here with unbeautifulnesses, and joyous and grateful just hit me like a ton of bricks. All right, so there was a moment. There was a moment. Lots of people have those. You know, Ed creates these moments. And one of the reasons that people come up to you is that it's not that you're just emitting so much light, though you do, but the light within them is prompting them, you know, all their social architect, you know, seraphic, whatever, is, you know, get out. And, you know, a person who's at all receptive at a teachable moment will be motivated to go out and reach out to you like that. These things do happen. Okay, end of that. Jeannie, talk to me. Oh, Susan, want to add something, please?
While you were talking and thinking back over what we've talked about today, it came to me that it's entirely possible when asking somebody to do something or making a suggestion that we can move too far beyond their capacity to receive. Just like in anything. So a request or a suggestion to do something also needs to be made in the light of that person's experience, capability, where they're at in their life. So so the question, wouldn't be, will you make a presentation at a workshop at an international conference as the first thing, unless you knew they'd done that before. Probably the conversation might be better to start at, well, have you ever done a workshop in your study group or a topical presentation or presented, at a local mini conference or whatever, that finding out what they have done and where their comfort level is. And then, then what would the next step be for them? Well, that would maybe be, would you be interested in preparing, something for our next international or our next national conference or whatever? I'm seeing, a progression just like anything else, and how, and then giving them ideas, if they're interested, and like we went through a whole bunch of these little ideas on how they could begin to prepare themselves. So that was, I just went the big light bulb, is that probably in all kinds of other parts of our life, that receptivity principle is probably helpful in, being more effective. So thank you.
Now, we have got 8 minutes left in our session, technically, and I'm just remembering a bit of old business. I'm just going to take time to mention it, and then I want to invite Jeannie to make any comments that she would like to add. And when she's done with her comments, she will say something worshipful and give us a minute or so in silence, and then we will hug each other goodbye in the gestures that are possible with these cameras. So, oh yeah, my bit of old business was a response to Gilles that did not occur to me after the little interaction having to do with ordaining teachers. And that was that if we if we simply celebrate the initiative of others and their unique individuality, there can be a risk of encouraging false freedom. Enough said. I thought of that afterwards, and now the rest of the meeting, Jeannie, is in your hands.
Thank you, Jeff. I am learning today very much. I am very grateful for your answers to Pio, because this is a very, very necessary subject to have some guide and some enlightening about how to engage young people in this active service. In my experience, it's not easy to do. Young people here in Latin America, we have many young people participating in meetings and study groups, but most of them do not want to engage in an active participation. They want to listen, they want to speak something in our meetings, but not have the responsibility of giving a lesson or a workshop, etc. And in my experience, my how can I say, when I try to engage someone, they feel they reject the opportunity. They say, I am not prepared. I am not ready to do this. I only want to participate in a more, how can I say, not in huge responsibility. And this is a very, very worrying situation, because most of the people that actively works in the Urantia movement are aging, are growing, no? So we need to motivate, I think. So your ideas, Jeff, are very, very useful, and I think you should have your writing to share your answers to Pio by writing. If you can share with us to share in the community, please. And I would like to translate it to Spanish and Portuguese, if you allow me. I think Gilles wants to say something.
Yeah, I just wanted to try to make a quick comment about the topic that Pio's brought up. I didn't know that there was like a lack of people volunteering for those conferences in terms of presenting. The few conferences I've been to were quite packed busy, and from what I heard, I've heard some people being having proposed something and being refused. So I was certainly not under the impression there was a lack of people wanting to volunteer some leadership. Though I can definitely see also the challenge of some people not wanting to be leaders, more followers, and also the stage fear kind of thing that we have mentioned. But in any case, to me, it seems that we have a bigger problem, which is to get more of an audience, people who are actually interested in being involved in what we want to discuss and share, the gospel, basically. I think we have a very big, as a Urantia movement in particular, we have a big problem. I mean, everybody knows it, and just way before me. And but I think we have a big bigger problem in our society. I think I heard or interpreted what Jeff was saying along the same line. I think we have bigger problem. I feel like society is splitting in half, or I don't know if it's in half, but there are those who are picking up the train and those who are going down. So that's to me, that's a bigger. I mean, I see it as a bigger problem that I'm not sure how to address, and how to get people who want to discuss those topics. This was the bottom line. And where do you find them before you present something and you share with them? That's my question. Maybe another topic, or actually an underlying topic in many conferences and discussions we have, because we see the Urantia movement aging, and so that's all. You can.
Yes, Tony.
Gilles, what you were saying is so interesting, because I know when we feel we have a hard time getting people to invest in an educational process, we realize that we've gotten out of touch with introducing them to hunger and wonder, that they've lost their sense of being amazed by the world, being curious, so that their curiosity overwhelms their fear and leads them forward into exploration. So I feel that if we in the Urantia movement come towards people with corrective energy rather than explorational energy, yeah, we're doomed to keep shrinking our listeners. And I think hunger and wonder give an opportunity to say, I'm exploring things. I have some ambivalencies. I have some questions. There are things that are complexified as much as they are resolved for me by this book. And that's exciting. That's a fun place to be in. I'd love to have someone to talk to about it. That's how I found myself approaching something that would end up looking like ministry, even though it's not what I was intending it to be. I just wanted fellowship in being able to ask questions and stay in touch with that curiosity.
Yes, thank you for your comment.
Thank you for your question.
So how many of us here today, raise your hand, are professional teachers or instructors? Okay.
I raise one finger because I am not really, but I've had a little bit, and I certainly have a passion for it. So that's definitely the career that at some point I had chosen, and I had actually a little bit done. And I'm thinking of doing something along those lines as a retirement. The sooner the better.
Thank you. So just for my statistics and mine, so Jeff, of course, he did not raise his hand, but Jeff, Marie, and Gilles. Okay. So
it's not my profession. Just like the tip of my finger as more in my heart and very little experience.
That's very important. Thank you.
Jeff, would you like to close this meeting?
Okay, let us.
Well, did you want me to say something?
Oh, did you say Jeff or Ed, Jeannie?
Jeff. Or
Jeff.
Anyone, as you like.
Well, I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to guess that I heard me, my name, so I'm going to go ahead and get us out of here, so to speak, via another minute with our Father, our Master Son, the awesome Mother Spirit, and the Father of our soul, indwelling us so intimately. We return now to where we started, remembering that truth is revealed first of all by the eternal Son, And Jesus represents the eternal Son as much as he represents the Father. Even though his seventh bestowal was devoted to revealing the Father's will, he now represents all the paradise deities in every combination, as well as the Supreme. And we remember how it is that cosmic mind, in its threefold articulation of the cosmic discrimination, comes through the adjutants, the mind spirits of intuition, understanding, courage, knowledge, counsel, worship, and wisdom. All to bless and guide our inquiries so that we may continue to grow as teachers. Let us now worship, commune. I will give a worship thought to launch this moment. That worship is the conscious and joyous conscious and joyous recognition, which can be intellectual, and acknowledgement, which is already social and interpersonal. The conscious and joyous recognition and acknowledgement of the intimate and personal relationships of the gods with their creatures.
Amen. I guess Jeff is gone, everybody. Wake up. And I want to say happy Thanksgiving. Love you.
Have a great trip, Donna.
Thank you.
Have a great trip.
Thank you so much. Enjoyed the conversation so much.
you.
Blessings.
It was great conversation. Thank Jill,
Thank you.
Jeff.
Jeannie.
Thank
you,
you,
everybody.
everyone.
Next Saturday.